Right, I think I'm going to begin. Afternoon, everybody. This is South African Chamber of Commerce. I'm Sharon Constanson, and it's a pleasure to have all of you joining us today for the beginning of a series of webinars that are there for membership benefit and for improving our lives in our lockdown environment. Our first webinar speaker is a good friend of mine who I've known for a little while now, and who is from Johannesburg. She has a passion for sustainability. Today she spends her time in Bath, in the UK. And if you look up and you speak about her or you read about her, the first thing you hear about is her purpose. She is here for that purpose, and that is the way she operates, and it's her reason for being. Her boutique consultancy, It's the Shovel, has actually worked for global clients internationally and all over the world. She spent her time helping them do better and more sustainable business. Jessica also not only works with people, she actually works with individuals as well. And today what we are going to be sharing is how can some of this corporate messaging be utilized for some of us as individuals who, in a time of crisis as we're in now, are not always effectively managing ourselves, least of all our engagement with the complexities that life has thrown to us. I'd like to welcome everyone who is on Zoom and all of those that are on Facebook with us. We will be taking questions at the end of the talk. I will be asking a few questions to begin with, and then we will open it up to all of you. Please, if I could ask that you place your questions on the chat line. We'll be picking them up and asking as many of them as we have time for. So please keep them coming. It definitely adds to the engagement for all of us. At this point, I would like to hand over to Jessica, who's going to run a presentation and talk to us about embracing the curve. Over to you, Jessica.
Great, thanks so much, Sharon, and thanks so much for the opportunity, and hello to everybody out there. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear, and hope you're all healthy and happy, and that what I've got to share with you today adds some value. As Sharon said, my name is Jessica Whitcutt-Fagan. My business is called It's a Shovel, so hopefully you won't forget that. And I'm a small business owner here in the UK. I've been running my business for 3 years before we moved to the UK, and we're finally getting things up and running before the COVID hit. So like many other small businesses, many other small businesses, kind of business just vanished and dried up completely, which on the face of it is kind of pretty depressing. But I've seen this movie before. I've done lots of projects and change initiatives, but perhaps what's had the biggest impact of me is when I lived through it firsthand. I used to work for SAB Miller, and there was 1 year between the announcement of the deal that we were being bought out by AB InBev and that deal actually going through. And that time we went through every single emotion in the change curve. It was sad, it was happy, it was exciting, it was depressing, it was frustrating. And it was a classic, it was a textbook case of moving through a change curve. So I'm going to share these insights with you today. I hope it'll make sense within your own context. And the basic message is, and I'll repeat it at the end, don't rush. This is a process. We need to just move through the curve. I am going to, here I'm back. I'm going to share my screen. So give me 1 second while I set, Sharon, I can't share screen. We are getting there, slowly, hang on. There we go, right. Can everybody see embrace the curve? Okay, Sharon, can you see?
Yes, I can. Okay, absolutely perfect. Yep, we're good to go.
Okay, cool. So done the intro. I'm going to take you through a quick 5 seconds of theory because I think it's interesting, and I mean, I promise you won't be boring. Then I'm going to take you through the 3 stages of change, the 3 main stages, and then I'm going to end up with the final message, and then we can open the conversation up. So yeah, to start with, we need to remember that we are humans, and humans are driven by emotion. Change management is big business, and there is loads of academic research, millions of change consultants out there, a dozen variations on the theme, but it all comes down to the one simple truth. Humans are, well, human, and humans are driven by emotion. We are emotional human beings. We are resistant to change. And because of this, change follows a predictable pattern. So this is the first model, the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. I think it's the one people will be most familiar with, the 5 stages of grief, from denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. This was actually developed at the end of the 60s, 1969, by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a Swiss-American scientist, and she developed this based on her work with terminally ill patients. Next up was I think it's called anyway, it's got a name. But this is one of the most widely used models. It was actually developed in the 80s, building off the 5 stages of grief model. You'll see very similar, but it really also looking at how, not so much about grief, but how people respond to change, moving from resisting and denying it to committing and moving forward with it. This is the Kotter model. He's one of the world's kind of most famous leadership gurus, and he did a lot of research into why change doesn't work. So the research he did, it found that only in 30% of organizations did the change initiatives actually lead to any kind of lasting change. So based on that, he put this model together, is widely used, starting with the step 1 of create a sense of urgency. So I call this the burning platform. Unless you have a burning platform to galvanize change, you're not going to move anyone anywhere. And then the second most important part of this is to have a vision for the future. So that's a widely used model. This is the Fisher transition curve. Got lots of little offshoots on here. It's quite a fun model to look at, but really looks at the human response to change. So, and there are varied responses. So it kind of starts off with anxiety, and then happiness, yay, something's about to change. And then you start getting a little bit fearful, like, how's this change going to affect me? And then they get, oh my God. You can either go off into denial there, it's like, change, what change? We don't want anything about change. Or it starts getting like really angry, or it's off the sense of disillusionment there, or hostility. But through all these things, there is a process, and if you can move your people along and move yourself along with this is kind of the human reaction to change, eventually ending up with, this could be good, how can we work at it? So this is the last one, second last one I'm going to be sharing with you. So this was actually developed by a communications agency, probably not too long ago, a couple of years ago. But really, it's, if you look at the bottom there, it's the keys to engagement. This is how you actually move the people along. So you remember in the Fisher graph we just saw just now, there was all these different reactions. So how do you manage those reactions? How do you channel people through this curve? These are the types of engagement tools you need to be putting in place, providing clarity, explaining what this is all about. Empathy, meeting your people with a sense of understanding, knowing where they're going to, working together on this thing, giving them the motivation to change, giving them the motivation to buy into the new vision, giving them capability, the skills and the tools to get there. And then, of course, obviously, with that, the knowledge they need.
Yeah, so moving on.
Sorry, I've got a scratchy throat all of a sudden. Okay, so this is the pandemic curve. This was released by Canvas 8 just a few weeks ago. They are a big research house, and you can see they have used this very similar, the 5 stages of grief, to look at this curve. But interestingly, in the change curve, it was kind of starts up, goes down, and then goes back up. The pandemic curve has got kind of these wobbly sections in it. And this is this process of adjustment, policing behavior, how we're going to manage fallout, how to provide support and entertainment in this weird lockdown world. What are the innovations and adaptations we need to put in to cope with life in this new lockdown scenario, or even coming out of lockdown? How do we adjust to that? And then there's this long tail towards reevaluation, kind of accepting this and moving into the new normal. I put all these things together into a mush, really. I did this in early March, actually, and at that point, the UK government was giving us a 6-month time frame. So I kind of plotted the different stages of it according to a time scale, and we are now in May. So technically we're in depression, which is probably not far from the truth, heading towards May acceptance. We kind of come mostly out of the fear. We've done some adjustment and we're moving forward into a kind of a reevaluation. And I think that's very much where we are. But it's not always the same for all people. There are these 3 main stages of change, and I think let's go through them now. And I think this is particularly important because you have to understand that people adapt to change at different speeds. And some people might skip steps, but it's not everyone's going to progress in a completely linear fashion through all of this at the same time. So to move your organizations forward and even to move your families forward, you need to understand where people are at, meet them where they are so that you can lead them to where you need them to be. So going through these stages, stage 1 was really, if you can think back to the early weeks of this, it was kind of the end. A lot of trauma, a lot of fear, a lot of, oh my God, what's happened now? Massive information overload, not that that's necessarily gone away. But it was a really upsetting time for very many people, quite scary. A lot of people all of a sudden being put on furlough or facing redundancies or business just evaporating, a lot of panic around. The positive part of this is obviously trauma creates group bonds. I've got a funny story where I was on a previously long ago, I worked for a company. I don't know if there's many South Africans on the line, you'll remember eBucks. And we used to do a team breakaway every year. And the one year we decided to go on a cruise, one of those cruise to nowhere things. And if you leave Durban Harbour and you sail around for a day or 2 and you come back. And we had awful weather. So the boat was pitching at 40 degrees angles. Everyone was vomiting, stuck downstairs. I was pregnant. We had a couple other pregnant fairies on the trip also. It was just the most horrific trip ever. But you know what? It's through that kind of everybody suffering together, there was this sense of like team unity. We even had T-shirts made at the end of it that I survived the melody. And I mean, I know it's a really trivial example, but it just is an example of how going through a trauma does bring people together. And that's something you can look at in your businesses as how you all managing this and how you've all helped each other and how you all stepped up, and it does create a unity. I think what we also need to talk about here is this kind of how fear shuts your brain down. Neuroscience has found that you're actually 25% less intelligent when you're in a state of fear. Your brain moves into fight or flight mode, so making executive level decisions to using your prefrontal cortex is that much more difficult for you. So it's really important to acknowledge this and understand it, to manage how you process information. It's kind of almost like you cannot think yourself way through this. You need to give yourself the time to be mindful, place the problem in your head, take a break. You cannot be creative in a state of constant stress and fear. So know it, accept it, work around it, and know that it is true for other people also. And then lastly, I think on this point, it's a time to really, I think many people would have moved through it, but I think what has helped a lot of people move through it is a sense of generosity and the sense of support and the sense of we're in this together. And that was absolutely the correct response to a time like this. The next stage is transitions, and this is that wobbly bit in the pandemic curve. And as much as the first phase was really high pressure, stress, intense, kind of, it was adrenaline adrenaline fueled. This next phase is much slower, much more boring, much more frustrating. And I think that's where a lot of people are right now. You know, we still don't know. There's high degrees of uncertainty. It's incredibly difficult to plan for a future when you don't know what that future is going to be. It's, you know, a sense of endurance. You just got to grit and get on through it. And what helps at a time like this is to meet the moment with purpose. Again, we can see this has happened a lot with companies around us, really stepping up to the plate to help their employees and help their communities. And that gives people a central point to focus on, and to galvanize action and to galvanize a positivity, which you really need to get through it. The point here is that culture shift in unsettled times, and that's definitely true. I mean, if you look at the end, or even during World War II, when women started having to go into the workplace and running the factories while the men were all at work, and having to, what they called the land girls, who had to go out and, you know, bring the harvest in. It fundamentally shifted culture, the way it was, the prevailing culture. And also, you need to remember at a time like this, the markets are driven by optimism. You can see exactly what happened in the stock markets when this whole thing happened, massive plungers in all the global exchanges, and slowly things start trickling back up. I think they're down again now, or yesterday. But markets are fueled on sentiment, and the more negative overall sentiment is, the worse our markets are going to be. So we all need to bring a sense of positivity and optimism into this. And this is not kind of fake sunshine journalism and fake smiles. We really need to find those things that really do create positivity, that really are positive. And a great way to do that is to kind of empower your employees to be citizen journalists. Let them go, well, maybe not physically, but virtually out there, and find those good news stories of what's happening inside your organization or inside your community, and let this narrative take hold, to shift us into a more optimistic and positive frame, so that we can move through this stage of adjustment into the next stage. And that next stage is really the new beginnings. To get to this, it's really important to understand that reflection is part of regeneration. To know or to move through something, whatever that something may be, or deep reflection on what was right or wrong within that context, that work needs to be done. And with those learnings and insights and wisdoms, we can start recreating the new. And this really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to reset the global narrative. I mean, it's not like life was all completely 100% peachy before we went into this. So there was massive issues with climate change, massive social issues, and I think those social issues have really come to the fore now. People can understand that it's actually not just about the environment. Society and the issues within society are a huge part of it too. And that gives us an opportunity to rethink what's possible. Companies, example now, GSK and Sanofi, which are two of the biggest pharma companies in the world, who've been kind of arch enemies forever, have signed up a kind of joint venture partnership to develop a new vaccine together. So that kind of a collaboration that would never have happened was it not for this. And what are the other sorts of collaborations that you could do, or that you could get into? There needs to be a sense of decisiveness to move things to this final stage. The first bits we saw a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, denial, etc. But do you think back to that Kotter model? Is, you know, that was the burning platform. Everybody was scared we needed to do stuff, but where are we going? And setting that strategic vision, and decisively acting towards that, even in a sense of uncertainty, is what moves everybody through this last phase of the journey. So even if you're not 100% sure of what the path forward is going to be, share it with your team. If nothing, this whole process has taught us resilience, taught us how to be more innovative, how to collaborate. And those are really important qualities for your team to have as you move into this new, the new normal phase. So that's kind of it on that. So my final thought to share with everybody, this is a piece of graffiti found on the wall of one of the subways in Hong Kong. And it says, "We can't return to normal because the normal that we had was precisely the problem." And I think that sums it up in a nutshell. This new normal that everybody's talking about, I don't think it will be normal. It will definitely be new. But how can we shape this to have the world that we want to have, that we need to have? It's, as we said, we're in a generation shaping moment, and we've seen pandemics before, but never really with the kind of perfect storm that we've got now. They're talking about not just a great recession, but the greater recession as we come out of this. And we've got all this environmental and climate change drama still lingering out there. Yes, the planet's had a bit of a breather, but it certainly hasn't gone away. And not only are these environmental risks out there, but what we've learned through this pandemic, that as we destroy the biodiversity of the planet, so the risk for pandemics like this get bigger and bigger. So there can be no return to normal. We can create a new normal, but what is that we're going to create? And that's it from me on the slides, but I hope that's been useful, and maybe we can open the floor to some questions now.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. And I found the part of the two graphs and how they map over each other. I found that quite an interesting statistic, that the different ways of looking at things have a lot of commonalities as to how our brains are working. So I'd like to ask you a couple of questions first. And could I please ask the attendees, if you have questions, please, if you could put those up on the chat line. I'm sure you've got things that are really pressing and important to you that will help you in terms of your personal, family, or business life. Just a quick question there. You talk about some of the roles that you have had in your career, and obviously some of the models that we've got, which are quite academic. How does somebody like me, for example, internalize that and say, given all of that corporate information, how do I manage it, as you referred to earlier, in your small business, or even in your family, or particularly for me, myself, how can I adapt that to me?
So yes, I mean, there are corporate models, but they're all based on humans, and we are all humans. So, you know, a corporate's just a big collection of humans. So a small business or a family unit is actually, in a way, easier to manage change through using these models 100%, because they're all based on humans. The problem is smaller.
Why is family easier, just as a matter of interest?
Well, because there's fewer humans in that unit. However, the smaller the grouping, the more intimately connected people tend to be, and the more resistant to a change people tend to be, because now you've got a group that's all very aligned on a certain path, and creating a change is difficult. But the model works whether you're dealing with, I don't know, Google or number 4 Kempthorne Lane.
The statistic you gave is that when we're in fight or flight mode, is that we are not as intelligent. Is that because we don't stop and think? And what would you give us as a tip to say, okay, I've recognized I'm in fight or flight, I'm not thinking clearly. What would you say to an individual in that moment to sort of help kick them into a more manageable emotional space?
Sure. So, yeah, humans are basically driven by their reptile brain. So that's an amygdala down at the bottom of your brain. And that is the oldest part of the brain. And that is where all emotion lives. And that is where your default behavior and actions go to when you're under any kind of stress. So knowing that, yes, obviously, what happens though is kind of your prefrontal cortex shuts down. So to get that reactivated, you actually need to take a moment. You need to be mindful. Mindfulness as a practice is, I think it's losing the woo-ness to it. I mean, it really seriously works. And it's about clearing the noise in your head. Let go of that incessant chatter and, all the fear that, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's really taking a break, letting it, meditate or go for a walk or
I can understand that,
or listen to music, just get yourself out of that.
Is that where we get that comment, sleep on it?
Absolutely. I mean, why do you think your best ideas come in the shower? Because, you've been thinking about this and, plotting it, and now you're doing something different with a sensory input onto your body, and ka-ching, brilliant idea. There you go.
Yeah, let the mind think while it's not being cluttered at that point in time. You were talking about how a leader in a business, so let's take an SME environment or a chairman of a board or something of a smaller group of people, and you're in a position where, like we all are right now, is we don't actually know what's coming. We didn't know what was coming in January, and look what 2020 has brought to what we all thought was going to be a magical beginning to a new decade. Well, we have to admit it's a different beginning to this decade. And we can't see forward next month. We have ideas and we can only extrapolate from where we are now. What advice and how would you encourage a chairman, a leader of a team, a head of a department to behave with those people when they are in equally a degree of uncertainty? You talked about transparency and positivity. Could you just expand a bit on that?
So, I mean, I think the biggest frustration for us all is this uncertainty. And the issue with uncertainty is, well, it's uncertain. So uncertainty is, there's a bunch of variables out there and we don't know what's going to happen. And because of that, we can't properly manage risk. So risk is about having, a defined set of probable outcomes and choosing one of them. In this case, we don't know. So the only thing you can do in a situation like that is to use your judgment. And this requires great leadership. This is why so many people are saying that this is the moment for great leadership. It's hard to take people with you on a journey when you don't know where you're going. And purpose and getting back to the company's meaning is what is so important here. Understanding that companies are there about all stakeholders. They're not just about their shareholders. That looking after employees at a time like this is actually the only and the most important thing they can do. And looking after their communities. In fact, there's some research that's come out now on some reputation research that the number one expectation of companies at the moment is, number one is their employees, number two are their communities, and only then their customers, and shareholders are like at the bottom of the pile. So if you're trying to lead your business through this time, stick to what gives meaning. Why is your business there in the first place? What are you there to do? How can you help? How can you make it better for one or many?
And does that risk the individual being seen as being weak or as being engaged? How would people look to that leader when they can't give certainty?
So there's a huge trend at the moment of what we're calling shared sacrifice and shared responsibility. And this is about being humble, being honest, being open, talk about the difficulties you're having. Talk about the sacrifices that, you or your team, your business is making. And talk about how you're stepping up in terms of your responsibilities. Nobody knows. There is no magic bullet. There's no here, take the red or the blue and you'll figure it out. This is about being organically humble and authentic and real. The time of, whatever, Apple riding into the, future with Steve Jobs leading the way and the guru of all. Nobody is that at the moment. So just do your best.
And if you were sitting in a leadership position as a chief exec of a business, pick an industry if it makes it easier to answer the question, is how do they actually sit down in practical terms? I've now got my team. The business I used to have is not what it would be because I'm not selling, because the customers can't, or whatever the industry might be. How do you actually sit down and plot creatively or creativity, or how do you plan those individual steps? How would that individual lead their team to survive or change or become something different?
So I think it starts with understanding that there's different phases we need to be thinking about. So the first phase is obviously how to manage this crisis. And that's generally quite a reactive thing, batting down the hatches, bringing in the cash, doing what needs to be done to just get through this. And next is how to plan, how are you going to cope with the recession that's coming? And that's really looking kind of at product offering, looking at pricing, looking at alternative channels, moving to online. What are the opportunities in that? Then there's how you're going to, take advantage of the rebound. When is that rebound likely to happen? How, where, what markets, where do you need to be positioned, etc.? What are your competitors doing? And then it's this long-term thinking that needs to be done. And that's really, I know leaders are under a lot of stress and pressure at the moment, but you really need to be taking some time out to give that proper thought. So look at the kind of ultimate, what is, blue sky horizon, or what is the ultimate dream, or what could you maybe get to, or what would you want to be? And then kind of working that back as to what you need to be doing now.
I've come across a number of really interesting stories, one coming from South Africa that comes to mind, and they are in the automotive industry, and they make various different parts for Volkswagen, Toyota, and various other automobile companies in that part of the country. And what they've done is they've put together a ventilator. They've created a non-invasive ventilator. And what I found really interesting is how quickly they were innovatively able to do something that is responding to the current problem. Have you come across any of those kind of stories?
Look, I think there are lots. I know, I think it's Dyson down the road here have also adapted their plants. A lot of companies getting into kind of mask manufacture.
Yes. I've seen that
Gap
too.
has doing scrubs for the nurses. There's loads, and I think the immediate needs are more or less met, other than obviously testing and a vaccine. But what's the next thing? So now,
how do we survive? How do we flourish now?
Yeah. So if we can't travel, what are the alternative things that companies can provide in their local markets? If we can't, necessarily all go to the pub together, then how are we going to do that? So I think enough of the new picture has emerged for companies to be able to draw some conclusions or pose specific scenarios and start working on those.
Yeah, correct. The one thing that the UK, and I think to a certain degree South Africa, post the president speaking last night, we have people within our communities. You have people who can think within a broader, here are the parameters, like our regulations might be, they're not prescriptive, and that's I'm talking about our corporate regulations. They're not prescriptive, and they allow some degree of adaptation by organizations within that regulation. And there are others that want a tick box style completion governance type of system. And we're in this situation that at the moment, some people are saying, I can't cope with the fact I'm being given a broader parameter within which to work and to work out what is right for me, my company, and my community. And others are saying, I want a tick box environment. I want to be told exactly what to do. And you need to put me in a box that I know what my box looks like. how does this come about? Why are we like this? And why are we therefore getting this complete confusion and different points of view on the same topic?
Oh, man, Sharon. Why are we like that? Look, I think some people it's a risk.
Yeah. Some people are saying I'm
yeah.
not wearing a mask. People say I should wear a mask. I'm not going to wear a mask. I mean, let's take it down to simplicity.
So I've heard that there's it's kind of a 10-40-40-10 split. So 10% are like, whatever, I'm going to just do whatever I want to do. 40% are, happy to take the initiative and, this figure it out yourself is fine, but this will do it reasonably sensibly. 40% are nervous and want, the box, and 10% are just going to sit in their houses for the rest of their lives. So it's, pick where you want to be. I think the future always belongs to the brave. You're never going to get anywhere new by doing what you've been doing all along. So, but it has to feel right for you. It has to feel right for your team. But I think to survive and thrive, you're going to need to take some initiative.
And do you think organizations are going to embrace the working remotely, less traveling, making decisions in electronic type environments? Do you think we are going to, you said earlier, we need to have a burning platform to create change. Well, we've got one, we're dealing with one. Do you think that will be one of our outcomes? In your opinion?
Absolutely, definitely. I mean, who would, well, okay, yeah. There's some people who potentially would want to go to the office, but I mean, given the option of an hour and a half commute or working from home, which would you choose? I mean, I work from home anyway, so it doesn't really affect me. But let me tell you, when I left corporate and I didn't have to commute, it was like a rebirth in my life. So I get
there are many people I work with in the city who their whole life is engagement within their community, the back office, the front office, things like that. And they find they're working differently, and they didn't like it, loved it, and are now starting to say, I'm actually missing the human interaction.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where we're going to get the kind of the hybrid model. So, that Friday evening drinks with the team, you can't replace that. You can't, that whilst meetings get a bit much, you do actually, there is a different dynamic when you're in the room and you're feeding off each other and brainstorming and coming up and, problem solving. So I think you always need a mix of it. But what is going to be very interesting is if, let's say 50% of people now work from home, what that means 50% of offices are empty. So what are we going to do with that space? How are we going to utilize it efficiently?
I think the hot desk of jamming people into long rows of desks, and you choose whichever one is first available. I would think from a hygiene of the virus perspective, that's probably part of our pasts as well.
Absolutely.
Just banks of desks. I think that's gone. Social distance, you've got to have 2 empty desks between you. At least for 2 empty seats on an aeroplane.
Yeah,
The thing I wonder, we've talked about how this virus has impacted different diversities in different ways. So if I look at the diversity of age, and I look at the diversity of gender, and we look at diversity of ethnicity, how are there any stats or any understandings of how just those 3 diversities might respond differently? Is there anything? Or are people still just so unique that you could not generalize in that way?
Look, I mean, I know it's not my area of speciality at all, but I know certainly ethnicity has been a huge issue in terms of incidence of the virus. In terms of responses to it, I haven't seen, but I haven't also been looking for any research on that. But if we think about the change curve, I mean, there's no gender issue or
no, there hasn't. I didn't see that either
in that. So I mean, it's human response to change is a human response, no matter I mean, obviously individual circumstances, but yeah.
It holds that way. And we've found a lot of people have responded to some of the nonsense that comes out there that 5G is causing COVID, or if I wear a mask, I'm safe 100%. You know, there are some beliefs and some fake news. Why do people accept this kind of nonsense? I mean, and I've heard many others that if you just drinks hot water or something, then you won't get COVID. Or there are some strange beliefs that are out there. Why do people respond like that? Where are they in the curve when this is happening?
Well, they're somewhere in the curve. They're still in the fear part of it, probably. But actually, it's a really fascinating stuff, and I can't remember it in too much detail, but why people fall for conspiracy theories. And it's actually like a mental state of mind. It's like not a, I wouldn't say like mental problem, but like you are mentally wired differently to believe the stuff. And it's almost like it fulfills your ego. I mean, we're all built to, manage and protect our own ego. And these sorts of theories feed your sense of security and your ego. So I don't know, I'm not the expert, but maybe that's it.
I'm just asking the participants, we've still got many of you on the line. If you'd like to just add some questions so that we can continue the conversation. We have got to the point we were at a point we can end. So if anybody does want to go, you can. We're up to our limited time. But if anybody would like to pose any more questions, we will carry on for a few more minutes. I will, in the meantime, just chat to Jessica on another issue or two. If we look at if we just looked at a meeting, having a meeting in an office environment in the future, how might that change for us, coping through the anger? You walk into a room now and everyone says, oh, you're going to infect me, you're going to kill me. How are we as individuals going to build the trust of being in each other's space again, other than that we're locked down with?
Yeah. Look, until there's a vaccine and or a really good test, I think it will always be a leap of faith. Again, I think we're going to have this 10-40-40-10 split, so some people just won't be comfortable at all. Others will be more open to it. Where you're in a work environment and you're expected to attend a meeting, I think this is where it's going to get tricky for companies. And I think those that are saying, we need more government guidance and I mean, it's exactly this kind of thing. So what exactly are employee rights in a situation like that? And what do the unions do? And it gets into a kind of a messy legal kind of space. But I think we also have to acknowledge humanity, that not everyone is brave enough to climb Kilimanjaro. Not everyone is brave enough to confront these sorts of things, and that's fine.
What are your thoughts on the universal basic income to liberate us from work bondage, so that for most to allow people to really blossom in the world? How can we untie ourselves and become freer? So, and it's probably part of your cycle.
Yeah, so I mean, this universal basic income was a big thing long before COVID. And I think Finland or one of the Scandinavian countries did a pilot on it. It was spurred on by the whole notion that the robots are coming and AI is going to take over and all the jobs are going to be lost, which I don't think is true. But anyway, I think it is something that needs to be worked on. I think in theory, it's a good idea. How we're going to pay for it, I have no idea. And what are people actually going to do? And that was the study, that people were actually a lot happier. They got into all sorts of other different things and started creating value or generating value in other ways. So I think it's definitely there. And I think we've had this weird taste of it now. So we've all been sitting at home. And a lot of people are literally on furlough or, and what are they doing? And everybody's kind of finding something. So I think it's a massively interesting social experiment that we're in the middle of.
We are part of a big experiment.
And and I think governments are going to have to start thinking about these things. So, if and other people say the economy is only going to ever recover to 90% of what it was, that means 10% of the world's population is now permanently excluded. So what happens with those people?
What sort of time frame would they be making reference to a statistic like that? If they say within a year or 2 or 5, you can understand that. But if you look through the economic crash, we did as an economy recover, but I suppose maybe the statistic is saying we'll never catch up that lost time. Maybe that's, I don't understand.
Maybe that's it. It was a story in The Economist. It comes from a credible source. I think it's just because so much has been fundamentally changed. We've never seen a shutdown like this ever. Even during the war, industry still continued. To have shut down global economies and had what I think it was 3 billion people at one point sitting at home doing nothing has never happened before. There will be fallouts from that. The number of small businesses that will go under, the number of industries, airline, tourism, travel, how they ever going to, come out of it? What is the new normal going to be? Maybe that's what they refer to with that 10% not missing.
Yeah, please take a glass of water. If we're looking for, sorry, carry on.
Smoker's cough, not COVID.
Actually, when you hear of people who have now got it, and you then listen to how or where they might have got it from, there are a lot of ways that people are catching it, and you can see why and how they've caught it. You say, well, what did you do? And I was chatting to people recently, and they all got together inappropriately on Mother's Day. And it'll be interesting to see if there's a spike as a result of that. But I do know of some cases now that have evolved out of that last weekend. If you are looking at individuals and they're looking at where they are in the cycle, you were talking about how you need to move along the curve. And if somebody is at the moment in that sort of anger, depression, frustrated place where, as you said, I think a lot of people are at the moment, what kind of tips would you give them to try and get out that bottom place and start that upward curve?
Okay.
How can they handle that as individuals?
So it's setting this vision for the future. So when you're in an organization, leadership sets the vision and communications, HR moves you through the curve. If you're doing it for yourself, you have to be the CEO and HR for yourself. So you need to set this vision. What is it that you want to be at the end of this? If we talk about this generation shaping moment, this complete reset opportunity, what is that, golden opportunity? What is that potential that you could be? And in exactly the same way as everything else, baby step it back. What do I have to do tomorrow to get to there? And that's a forward movement, that's moving towards something, even if that something changes over time, starts getting you out of a negative a place, a negative cycle, etc. Obviously, if there's professional help required, obviously you need to investigate that. But it's generally, I wouldn't say a clinical depression. It's generally a down feeling of anxiety and fear, and just it's a case of moving through it.
I think some people have felt trapped by the environment where they're used to having a routine that involved being able to go out and come back. And now being in that position that they feel fearful to go out, others demand to go out because that is their right, and they're going to get very depressed if they don't do that kind of thing. So I'm seeing a lot of people with very different responses to these frustrations that they're having to deal with. And in a work environment, the part that I'm still concerned about is how are we going to empower our people to be together in environments and create this creativity that I mentioned a few moments ago. if they are sitting still down in that fearful space. And because we're all working from home, we're not getting the HR guidance from many of our leaders because we're in small businesses. How do we actually help each other in a small business to step up and get that positive energy? I mean, one thing we're doing as a chamber is we're getting everyone together every 2 weeks or so to sing the national anthem together. And now we're going to get some good singers in place because we need some better voices than all of ours. And we're creating a positive energy of solidarity of South Africans just getting together to have a laugh. Yeah. And it does sound funny, and it is a good fun moment. So that's something, for example, we've done. It's a very, very small thing. But how do businesses try and help their people when they're not HR specialists?
Yeah, well, I mean, just understand that people are at a different space. So I don't know, make a list. Who the 5 people in your 10, 20 people in your team, you know, where would you plot them on the story? Look at that keys to engagement. You know, is it motivation they need, or clarity, or empathy? Meet people where they are.
I think that's important, is to get that they're not going to be where you are necessarily. Some might be on your 10-40-40 base, 10-40-40-10 basis, that people will be in different places, to be mindful and sensitized to that. But do you think it's time for us to change our value systems and to curb the fear that is being created by uncertainty? How do we curb our fear? How do we restate our value systems? What should change?
Yeah, so fear is a fundamental human emotion. There are only 7 human emotions, 5 of which are negative. One is surprise, which tips you between the both, and 1 positive, which is joy. So we are much more hardwired.
That's interesting.
Sorry.
Have a good cough. Don't worry.
In terms of survival, I mean, as primates, you know, it's dealing with the negative is much more important than, you know, staring at the sun. So don't think you're going to evolve past fear in a hurry ever. But it's knowing that it's part of it and kind of let it energize you rather than incapacitate you. And what was the other? Oh, our values.
Our values, yes.
I think values is exactly where we're at in all of this. Is, you know, that's why they say they're going to be all these divorces now, because like you've been stuck at home with him for so long. You don't share the same values actually when you come to it. You know, how much time you're spending with family and how important it is to you to be part of your community and help each other. So it's a big moment for reevaluation, and I think coming out of this, one of the big opportunities we have is what they're calling the green recovery, where government invests in and incentivizes investment in green, renewable, sustainable industries, which have been shown to be far better at creating new jobs than the old bad make waste businesses. But it's about values. It's, you know, if you're going to prioritize sustainability and green, that's a values-based decision. And I think a lot of people are in that. It's the top and the bottom of the kind of food chain. This is exactly where we are at the moment.
It definitely is challenging our values. It's challenging our planet. It's challenging global working together. We've been challenged at community levels, and we've seen a lot of very positive stepping up by individuals, by corporates, who probably wouldn't have ever made the kind of degree of efforts they have made to help their colleagues, their neighbors, their next door communities, those that are in a less fortunate position than themselves. Do you think we've got any hope that this human positivity that we have seen, where people have stepped up and beyond, will continue into the new norm?
I do. Maybe because I don't know, to see the world through rose-tinted glasses, but I really do believe it. And I think so. Before this, when I used to go speak to companies about why they need to bring purpose and sustainability, and I used to always say it to them that you're going to make more money if you do this, which happens to be true. And I think what people are going to see through this thing is, as we start lifting out of it, companies that have responded the most charitably and generously to the employees, etc., they're the ones who are going to make the most money. They're the ones who are going to get the support, and the guys the people, gender neutral, who have not necessarily done the right thing, will suffer. So it's going to be a natural attrition, kind of separating the wheat from the chaff as we go through this. And I think sustainable, values-based, purpose-driven business will be the norm going forward.
Well, I sincerely hope your hopes are right. And I think that's one of the ways of helping people step through this cycle and through the curve you made reference to, is actually thinking of somebody else and helping somebody else and focusing their time on others rather than on themselves at that moment. And that doing something constructive will probably also help people transition and move through the various stages they need to go through.
Exactly.
I would like to thank you. Sorry, say that again.
That vision for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time and for giving us your insights. I found them extremely valuable, and I still go back to putting those two curves on top of each other is really, really an interesting one for me. I like to look at pictures, and I have to say the ones with the guys running off and saying, I've got nothing to do with this, I want to disappear. And the other guys saying, a head in the sand. I thought those were really quite captivating. You are happy that we may have your slides available for download?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, and to all of those that are attending, this has been recorded and it is available for you to be able to share widely. And if anybody needs any support from a organization like It's a Shovel, where you just need that sounding board of sanity, you know now where to go and get it. And Jessica, thank you very, very much for sharing your time. It was very, very enlightening. And on the chat line, we have got plenty thank yous. And if we could, and everyone was visible, clap to you. Thank you very much. We've got a few claps coming through. Thanks for your time. And thank you, everybody.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.